Son of a bitch. It couldn't have been 5 minutes, and Troy was already complaining. Really, if Clementine was real honest with herself, it was 4 minutes, more than she expected from him. Rolling her eyes, she shot an annoyed glance over at her companion, who was slowly dragging himself up the slowly hill that they have encountered. It was quite steep, and she wasn't going to lie, but his moaning and groaning wasn't helping anyone, and it was just plain irritating. They had encountered this hill shortly after leaving the group, headed their way from the frozen lake into a large snowy plain. It wasn't gentle incline, stooping down to a height would make the drivers press down their pedals faster. If not all the way around the floors of their car, Clementine grew up in a place where it was generally flat, so hills always looked a bit imitating to her. "Fuck this hill," Troy growled once again, kicking the snow with a boot. Quirking a brow, Clementine shot him a dry look and muttered, "I have a hard time believing you complained this much when you were with Carver, so why do it in front of me?" Troy scoffed, shaking his head. "He's probably skinned me for bitching. You, I ain't so afraid of." She was almost about to retort something, but he continued. "Plus, y'all had plenty of opportunities to wire me out before, but y'all didn't, so I figured I must be alright with y'all." With a nod of affirmation, he seemed to be absolutely sure of himself. Well, it wasn't like she could argue. They all had some moments where they were letting Troy die be more than possible, convenient even, but even consciously continue helping. Clementine and Sarah especially seemed to care about keeping him alive, and now was strange without considering all he had done to terrorize them back at Howe's. But that was in the past now, and Clementine argued with herself. There wasn't anywhere to go but forward. "I guess that's true," she admitted, gazing up towards their climb. "But you didn't have to be so loud about it. I know it sucks, but once we're over it, we'll be fine, and it'll be fun going back." She even couldn't deny the childish pleasure in running down a hillside. Troy scoffed. "You know, the last time I came around here with Bill's group, it was easy to walk up, but now..." His eyes shot to his right arm, frowning. "Well, it ain't so easy anymore. I feel like it's all kind of fucked up." "I can imagine," Clementine replied, grunting as she stepped over the rock in their path. "But we'll be getting what we need to leave this area, so it'll be worth it." Despite giving another quiet mumble of protest, the man kept trudging on, his left arm swaying gently to keep himself balanced, though he cursed under his breath and complained about doing it. He wasn't stopping or even slowing down. His discipline was admirable. If nothing else, it must have come from the army. She didn't want to actively encourage him because knowing Troy, that might actually make him stop in the process. But when they exchanged a glance, she merely smiled and nodded. He rolled his eyes but gave a small smirk in return, puffing out a little sigh of effort. A few minutes later, they were already at the top of the hill, and Troy was bent over, catching his breath with his hand on his knee. Clementine realized this and was the most strenuous activity he had done since he lost his arm, though it was evident by his harsh breaths. "That wasn't easy, but thanks for agreeing to come with me," she eventually said. Yeah, shut it." Troy waved her off, shaking his head and straining himself out more. He tried to drop the topic, but she didn't want to just yet. "No, I felt that you were helping out a little more." His choice seemed to be abstain from voting about Arvo, appealing to Kenny to trust him. Troy's participation in the group was becoming more accepted and appreciated, that's for sure. "It goes a long way, especially since our numbers have gotten smaller," she admitted, flashing him a small smile. Troy scowled in response, but his words betrayed his expression. "Well, look around. We're all in a frickin' mess. I figured I'm the only man with this shit together left, so I better step up. I don't mean nothing." "It means something," Clementine assured. "I'm grateful for it, and I know Sarah is too, or at least for the gun handling lessons." A roll of the brown eyes was in response. "Speaking of Sarah, you know what kind of kid said to me before we left? She said she was sorry for sassing me earlier. And to be safe, what the hell was that?" "That definitely sounded like Sarah." Clementine smiled and replied, "It's what she does. She's a good person, and good people wish each other well and apologize when they do something wrong or feel bad." Grimacing, Troy retorted, "I don't get it why it's necessary. You all talk about your feelings so much in all honesty. It's probably best to keep them buried underneath. makes it all so much bearable. With a shrug, Clementine pointed out, that may work for you, but it's best not for everyone, and we aren't the only ones to talk about our feelings with, you know. She then narrowed her eyes, not liking him insinuating she was weak for having emotions. Whatever. It seemed like he was really trying to drop the subject again, so she let him be this time. Troy lifted his gaze, drifted over the hill they had just climbed, and swept over to the plain up ahead. Ready to move on, she asked. He nodded. Where there's more hills nearby, but there'll be more in the direction of Howe's, so we don't need to go that way. Clementine blinked. Wait, what? We're near Howe's? Troy shook his head. No, not really. Howe's is about a couple of hours' drive, maybe. He pointed towards a patch of trees that stretched east. That is where it leads to the large-ass forest that goes on for forever. Walk that for a day or two, and if you don't get lost, you'll eventually reach Howe's. She didn't even realize that they were that close to their beginning point. It sort of felt like they have gone in a big circle. But she was more of a visual learner, so she quickly picked up a stray stick and began scribbling on the dirt. So here's where we started at Howe's, she began, drawing a rectangle indicating where her hardware store. After dragging the stick down to the path, she sketched squares for the strip mall, drugstore, and Parker's Run. Troy snatched the stick from her. This is the way we were supposed to go, or at least, where I thought we would all be going, he muttered, waving a twig above the snow right in front of Parker's Run. But this is the direction that the Russian kid brought us. He then dragged a deep line to the left and made another square. Clementine continued. Okay, so we stopped there at the fenced-in area with the generators and continued west, and then we encountered the lake. She watched as Troy draw down what she indicated, nodding to herself. He scribbled a large area to indicate the lake, and then added another rectangle for the Russian's unfinished house. She watched carefully as he dragged the sticks upwards to the right, making a path what she presumed to be their marking point for the rest stop. Once she scribbled the symbol on their destination, he closed the gap between it at the original house point. See, it's quite a while away, but we sort of went in a circle to end up here, he explained. Everything he drew was a bit wonky, coming from this non-dominant hand, but she got the gist of it. Examining their map a few more moments made her conclude that Wellington must be north of where they were going, and that they were originally came from to Howe's in the east. It was a bit confusing, so she was actually grateful for the visual. It helped her organize her thoughts and scientifically just where they were headed, and how much they traveled so far. Alright, so it shouldn't be a long walk to rest stop, right? She guessed, tilting her head to the map. Yeah, if we move our asses, says it shouldn't take more than an hour. Let's go. With that being nothing more to say, Troy began to hustle forward in the direction where Clementine could only assume was correct. She hurried after him, matching his pace with ease. Though through his injury was looking a bit better by the day, it still slowed him down considerably, but he didn't look at the pain, though. She was grateful for that. Seeing him in much as they did before he was horrible, even if he wasn't her favorite person. As they made their way through the snow, Clementine tried to think of what to say. She had a little comment with Troy, but she was curious about a few things. Whether or not he'd give up that information was unknown, though. It was a bitter than silence, so she might as well be. Her mouth open to ask a question, but before she gets the words out, Troy stopped ahead dead in the tracks. He held his arm out to stop her, as well as turning his head, focusing on something nearby. His expression was unreadable. A subtle determination was in the gaze. "What's the matter?" she whispered. But he just harshly hushed her. It seemed like he could hear something she could not. For as much as she tried to concentrate, the world still seemed to be silent to her. Troy took 2 steps forward and smashed his foot down. A loud sickening crunch sounded. A dark blood seeped from the shoe when he lifted up. The emotionless walker was hidden under all the white, trapped under the weight of the snow and unable to move until it was too late. She gazed at Troy in awe. "How did you do that and know it was in there?" Troy shook his head. "I could feel some vibrations under the snow. That thing was trying to claw its way up to the surface. Figured it could have been a lurker or an animal, and either way I was squishing it," he shrugged. "Army teaches you to pay attention to your surroundings, if nothing else." That was surprisingly resourceful, but she didn't doubt that he knew some tricks or two. Do you think there's any more under there? She asked, nudging towards the snow. Lurkers aren't usually alone, he pointed out with a shoulder shrug, so I'd watch where you're stepping if I was you. With a firm nod, Clementine cautiously stepped forward, keeping her eyes perked for any sight of sound or movement. As hard as she focused, though, she wasn't able to distinguish anything. She gave a soft, frustrated huff, shaking her head and looking towards Troy, as if though he held his answers. His face was blank again, lost in his own concentration. After a few moments, he began to trudge forward again. Nothing yet, but be careful, he warned, as she followed in silence. If I return to the group alone, they'll frickin' have my head. The rest stop didn't end up being too far away, just as Troy indicated. On the horizon was a small building sat, with its front doors clear with a small glance inside. The building itself wasn't that big, holding enough space what looked like to be bathrooms, vending machines, and an information desk. Behind it, or at least as Clementine could see through the glass doors, some old playground equipment that was set up, surrounded by at least one car. At the edges of her vision, she could see the corners of more cars, as well as the pavilion. It wasn't unreasonable to think where there'd be more vehicle beyond the scope that she could see. Hopefully, a truck or two. The second big hit to Clementine, that she was close to her ticket to the safer place. She quickened her steps. Her eyes were dead set on the building and the cold air, blowing against her barely after thought. Troy, come on, she urged, trying to hurry the pace almost into a jog. Wait, hold on a sec, Troy hissed from behind her, but his words couldn't connect in time. She had been so preoccupied with finding the jumper cable, what they needed, she almost forgot about the strategy of moving across the snowy area. Her feet shifted in the snow almost enough for her hand to smash through it, curled her fingers constructing around her ankle. The grip was unbreakable, causing her to lose her balance and fall. Crashing to the ground, she scrambled back just in time to dodge the rest of the walker that emerged from its hiding place. Milky white eyes looked at her, the creature's empty gaze somehow seeming predatory. Her pulse was quickening. Clementine reached for her hatchet, kicking the walker to get it to let go. When its fingers had bent around her leg once more, she tried not to panic, swung the weapon down onto its skull. Blood splattered and twitched, but its mouth still snapped open and shut hungrily. She swung again, desperate to keep its teeth away from her ankle. Another set of hands sprung from the ground behind her, snaking around from one of her arms. Yelping in surprise, Clementine realized how much she sprawled out into the cold floor, pinned by two walkers and leg and an arm. Blood roared in her ears as she brought the hatchet down again and again onto the first one, its rotting blood flickering on her face with each swing. The walker that held her arm was now gnashing its teeth as she revved, trying with all of her strength to escape. With a panicked shriek, she twisted the contorted about the snow, praying that there weren't any more walkers frozen underneath her. Her world spun, and her heart pounding as she pleaded with whoever was out there to help. A third hand was then grabbed around her torso, hauling her backwards. She failed, trying to get out of its grasp with all of her might, hitting her captor with her fists. It wasn't until she heard a yell, sounding like human, who she realized that there weren't not the only first two walkers dead, but Troy was currently pulling her away from them. Her heart still stammering in her chest, she muttered her thanks, and realized how much of desperation must have looked to him. Troy scowled, letting her go fall against the snow. What the hell was that? Did you forget whether you were being careful the whole way? Did you think the lurkers would just stop appearing just because we're here where we're needed to go? He looked halfway between disgust and amused, and her cheeks burned. No, I was just excited about getting away from all this snow, she offered, knowing it was a poor excuse. Thought you were smarter than that, Squirt, he said, with a roll of his eyes. Being over-eager like that could just get you killed one day. It's sort of like he was lecturing her, rather than just insulting her just for the fun of it. Almost like he was worried that she'd make a dumb mistake, like that again. Because of this weird Troy-like concern, she found it to be hard to be angry with his words. Okay, I'll be more careful, she promised, standing up and brushing herself off. Thank you, by the way. Don't mention it, he muttered, facing the rest stop in front of them. At least we're finally here. Nodding, Clementine cautiously followed him through the doors, just as she thought. It was a small building about the size of 2 rooms in the average house. Vending machines were toppled over, broken glass and contents were removed, An empty information desk sat in the corner. Next to the door was the playground and pavilions. Behind the desk was a bulletin board. Event flyers were pinned in place. 2 bathroom doors were on the opposite side as the entrance, a water fountain between them, and a small informational stand with pamphlets placed in the corner. During the summer months, back when everything was normal, of course, Clementine could see this place being popular for truckers or for traveling families. She wasn't a stranger to these kind of rest stops. Her parents loved to travel and took the opportunity for getaways as often as they could. Since she was a baby, Clementine joined in most of their family trips. The only reason she didn't go to Savannah those fateful few weeks was because they were only going to a wedding and kids weren't invited. But on the trips she did go on, she enjoyed every moment of them. Briefly, she remembered her parents stopping at a similar pace to stretch their legs and use the bathroom. She absolutely loved looking at all the fun pictures of the pamphlets and, of course, begging her dad for a snack. In a pointless effort to feel unannounced at some same innocence, she approached the stand with the information packets and picked one up. Inside were faded pictures of nearby attractions, photos of smiling people who probably weren't alive anymore, or at the very least, were no longer smiling like that. Oh look, the Red Hot Chili Peppers are playing at the National Theater. Troy's voice made her jump. She didn't expect him to be appearing right next to her so suddenly. His eyes were on the pamphlet. I hear they're pretty good live. Think we could make the show? Though it wasn't really a time for a stupid joke. She still snickered under her breath. Maybe we could sneak in or scalp a ticket outside. I've never heard of those songs though. Really? Lee, what? Californian education is a jam that can't beat. Troy shook his head. Damn kids today. Clementine then raises her eyebrow. How old are you anyway? With a grimace, the man replied, Not that old, sheesh. I ain't sure what day anymore, but I'm pretty sure I'm 29. He wasn't completely sure. She wanted to argue that Luke had known his own birthday, and she had kept the track of her age and the day as best she could, but she supposed everyone ran on their own clocks of sort. Troy's just happened to not be very functional. Did you ever go on family vacations? She asked. Yes, they were there for a specific reason, but she wanted to learn more about the guy if she was able to. The opportunity to ask arose. Unfortunately, he didn't seem to be happy if asked that. Not as a kid. Like, fuck, my dad would always want my ass to go anywhere with him, but I did go on a trip or two with Colton when I was able to get the leave time. She nodded. I went with my parents a lot. I remember they were really fun. Nice to get away from all the shit, I'll give you that, Troy agreed. She wanted to ask what sort of things that he expected her to get away from as a child, but something about his tone told her that she shouldn't ask. It seemed like he was done talking about it anyway. He turned away from the bathrooms towards the information desk, eyes focused on the door to the outside. Well, I guess the looking old event pamphlets isn't helping us get a jumper cable, she murmured to herself, setting the paper back down where she found it, and turning towards the door leading to the playground. Once they were outside, Troy swept the gaze slowly to their snowy surroundings. There was some playground equipment as well as 2 pavilions nearby and a few parked cars in the area. All the tires were gone from them and their windows were shattered. So far they didn't see any trucks. Everything looks ransacked, she murmured, frowning. Yeah, but there's a parking lot around the corner. Can't remember if I saw a truck when we came here, but maybe. I'll go take a look. Why don't you go swing or something? A shit-eating grin crossed Troy's face as she narrowed her eyes in annoyance. Did he really think she was 5? If you really think I'm staying here to play, you're out of your mind, she growled, giving him a slight shove as she brushed the last part of him. She continued to snicker behind her, but of course she took her head. Idiot. Around the corner there was indeed a large parking lot. The snow covered it mostly undisturbed. Some cars were covered than others, indicating that they'd been either salvaged through already. Her eyes scanned a lot, trying to seem to find anything larger than a car. Bingo, Troy said beside her, nodding towards a large snow mountain at the corner of the lot. When he approached it and brushed it off a little, Clementine had realized it was indeed a truck. Brightening, she began to inspect it with her companion. The door looked frozen shut, but the windows were still intact. Someone hadn't salvaged it yet, though. Clementine's heart sped up. What they were going to find when they needed inside. How should we break it through? She asked, placing a hand on the surface of the window before drawing it back with a quiet hiss. It was more than just cold. It was frozen solid. When she told him that, Troy muttered something under his breath as he took a closer look himself. Pressing his knuckles against the window, he gave a silent nudge to test its thickness. I think I could break it through. Why do you think people ignore this truck? She asked, a bit suspicious that it was the only vehicles untouched. We couldn't see it from where we were inside the stop, and it was pretty hidden in the snow, Troy guessed. Clementine nodded. I don't really care anyway, as long as it has what we need. Same here. With a deep breath, Troy placed his elbow on the window, and his eyes were focused. This will be harder than with my left, but here it goes. He then pulled his arm back, and with one swift motion and a low yell of power, he thrusted the elbow onto the glass. Clementine then jumped when it broke in contact, shards falling onto the seat and down into the snow. Shaking off his arm, Troy reached down and forward and unlocked the truck from inside, swinging the door open. That was too frickin' easy, he boasted. With a roll of her eyes, Clementine hopped off onto the truck seat. Mindful of the glass, she remembered the important things in the vehicles that are usually kept are in the glove compartment. She carefully maneuvered over to the passenger side and opened it up. A bunch of items dumped onto the compartment, make a mess on the floor. Scrounging through the pile, turning on the tangled white charger cables and even CD cases. Before realizing that there wasn't what she was looking for there, cursing under her breath, she reported too much to Troy, who growled himself as well. Deciding to check on the whole interior of the truck, she turned around and crawled back towards the seat. The vehicle feeling of the giant compared to her. And there, sitting like a beacon of hope, the jumper cable sat in the back seat of the truck. She smiled brightly, reaching forward to grab it. The moment she did, however, a walker sprung out from the floor, jaw gnashing its arms, clawing around to grip something. She screeched and reeling back to kicking at it a bit, but it held onto her leg as it pulled it forward once more. It was getting frustrated to be ambushed again, but she decided that she could be annoyed about that after she was safe. Grab it for her hatchet didn't work, for her arm movement caused the walker to pull more, slamming her head down in the passenger seat, making her hatchet tumble down out of reach. Troy, help! The last thing she wanted to do was to rely on someone, especially him, but she had no other choice at the moment, and it was a logical solution, placing her trust in him. She dared to look back past the predator and saw Troy opening the back of the truck, pointing his gun at the walker. He fired the shot, but his arm was shaky and only hit the beast's shoulder. That distracted it long enough for him to put another bullet into its head. After the second shot ran out, Troy reached for her forward and snatched a cable from the back seat before turning his attention back to her. Damn it, Clementine, I thought I said you gotta be more careful, he snarled. I was, she insisted. I didn't expect this one to be back here. Lowering her head, she mumbled, but you saved me twice today. Thank you. Troy didn't seem to be in the mood for accepting praise. He looked agitated, swinging the front door open and motioning her to get out. I didn't want to have to shoot, but my frickin' stupid bad aim made me do it twice. Any lurkers in this area are probably heard. Now she understood why he was anxious. With a firm nod, she quickly retrieved her hatchet from the floor and hopped out of the truck. Pointing to what Troy had in his hand, she asked, Is that the exact same thing Kenny was looking for, right? She knew it was nothing she knew nothing next about cars. Granted, she was too little when the world ended, and she didn't have much of a chance to learn about them since. But Troy, on the other hand, seemed confident in his reply. Yep, I know enough about cars that break down. Trust me, I used to drive a beat-up piece of shit that always broke down. This little baby comes in handy. He held up a cable, nodding towards the clips on both ends, just like Kenny had indicated. But they looked miniature gator mouse, though. It was kind of neat to see, but they didn't have time to waste. So we're ready then, she asked. Yeah, let's get the fuck out of here before any more lurkers get any ideas, Troy said. They did their best to be careful leaving the area, conscious of where the snow had been if any walkers waiting to sprung up like daisies from underneath it. But they didn't run into any issues like Clementine had predicted, and it was much more rewarding to walk down the hill as it was walking up. It was almost actually fun. Even Troy seemed to be relieved it was an easy trip. Somewhere along the way, though, however, they have taken a wrong turn, or strayed a little further from their original path, and things seemed a little unfamiliar. Troy was having trouble figuring out which way was correct. "Oh fuck, I'm sure we're going the right way," he mumbled, his eyes sweeping his surroundings. Trees enveloped them, the forest stretching out further out than he must have realized. Clementine looked around for herself, nodding, but nothing but trees, or snow what seemed to look like miles. But there had to be a break in the forest, right? They crossed a few small plains of snow only to get to hills, so they had to be close. Had they? Taking a moment to pause, Clementine tried to imagine that the map they had stretched in the snow and where they were on right now. She wasn't in the best directions yet, but it seemed like they needed to head in more towards east to get back to the house. The question was, which direction were they facing now? "Are there any other hidden skills like you like to tap onto now, Troy?" she asked a bit dryly. They'd come in handy right now. Any tracking trips?" He scowled. "What do I frickin' look like, a Boy Scout?" She was definitely settled for anything at this point, if it got them back to the others. The others! Clementine had almost forgotten about her way back to get in contact with them. They probably wouldn't help with directions, but at least she would feel better letting them know that they were on their way back. "Hold that thought. Try to think of something while I contact the group," she said, turning away from him and fishing out the walkie-talkie from her pocket. Pressing down on the button, she quickly spoke into it. "Hello, Sarah? You are there?" There was a brief moment of silence before the other girl's voice sounded through the speaker. "Hi, Clem. Is everything okay?" It was a little nostalgic and bittersweet to hear the staticky filter of the walkie-talkie. With a small smile, Clementine replied, "Everything is fine. We found the jumper cables. Can you let everyone know we're on our way back?" "Oh yeah, sure. I think they're all outside right now, but I'll go tell them." "Thanks, Sarah. We also got a bit off the trail, so it'll take us a little longer to get back. Don't be alarmed if we get there a little later than expected, okay?" Clementine said, making sure that her friend understood. "Got it," Sarah replied, her voice sounding firm. "I'll see you soon then, Clem." "See you," she murmured into the walkie-talkie, then put it back in her pocket. Then she turned to Troy, as if he magically came up with a solution. Of course he didn't, but he still thought of something. "We probably ain't as lost as we think we are. If we kept going straight, we'll either hit more hills, which means we're heading to House, or we should turn around, or the frozen lake." Shouldn't be that tough," he explained. Clementine nodded. It wasn't the best answer, but it wasn't the worst. Even wordlessly, she followed them forward, keeping her eyes and ears trained for any signs of danger. The snowy forest floor wasn't exactly deep as the meadow ones areas like before, so she didn't have to worry about the walkers hiding underneath. "Once we get back," she murmured, trying to recap the situation and conversation, "this cable will start the truck, and we'll finally get out of there." "Yeah," Troy agreed, "but who the hell knows where our fricked up group is going to decide to go?" The implications behind that word weren't lost on Clementine, but she didn't comment. It spoke more to her to catch Troy using terms like that on his own, rather than pointing out to him and hearing him denying it. She then smiled to herself for a moment and nodded in her head in agreement. The truck looked like it only fit about 4 people, and we have 6 plus AJ. Troy knitted his eyebrows and knowing a grin on his face. 4 seats, hon? Sounds like someone will have to sit on my lap." Clementine scowled. "Absolutely not. You're out of your mind if you think I'll—" "Who said I meant you? Hell no." He almost looked offended by that suggestion. "Then who, Sarah?" She then spat back. "What? No, not her either. Jesus," Troy hissed. "I was talking about—" He paused, his words then dying away as if he realized what he was saying. Never mind. Clementine didn't understood, but she didn't exactly want to either, so she let the subject drop, noting Troy's embarrassed expression, shaking her head. That so pleasant exchange of words helped kill a few moments of silence, walking in the snow at least. Thankfully, though, they had continued along through the forest path, and the trees began to spread further apart, making the surrounding area easier to use. Clementine brightened. There were no hills in sight, which meant that they were getting closer to the lake. However, the moment the trees started to thin, it was easy to notice that something in the distance, sticking out like a sore thumb. Clementine squinted the brown shapes, realizing what they were once they got closer. A few logs were set up in the circle around to put out a campfire that was still smoking a little. Empty cans of beer and pop littered the ground, amongst all the other litter piles. The area looked like it had been slept in it, as if several patches of snow were disturbed. Someone was here, very, very recently, and it didn't seem like just one person. Clementine wrinkled her nose and Troy began to scavenge, watching him pick through the trash and search for something worth consuming. He was focused like he had been walking through the plains. She realized, not for the first time, that perhaps there was a reason he had survived so far. "Do you think Arvo and Mike stopped there?" she asked. "Doubt it. They left it in the middle of the night, right? They might have been further away by now, and I think these prints are going the opposite way." Troy pointed out towards the snowy path, marked a long path with footprint indentations. It wasn't snowing currently, but the clouds overhead looked like as if they were dark enough to hint a snowstorm soon. The prints had been covered in a few minutes, so they had to be careful. Then someone else? Clementine bit her lip, unsure of who it could be. For a moment she considered Krista. Her heart fluttered for a little. She let herself thinking maybe her lost friend, joining her once more. The woman would be so surprised to see Kenny alive, and hopefully things would be okay between them. Maybe a friend from the past would help Kenny. Of course that was a fantasy. She hadn't seen an unharmed Krista surrounded by 3 men in the woods. Krista had told her to run, and she did, like a coward, and the gunshot went off. She'd never seen Krista again after that. Even when running into the man that had cornered her, it wasn't hard to connect the dots, painful as to where they were. She let all hopes burn away and thrown the photo into the fire, returning to reality. Realistically, who could have this campsite belong to? She watched Troy dug around some more, until she picked up a particular item. A box of cigarettes with some brand names she wouldn't know anything about. And by the look of Troy's face, it seemed like he was familiar with it. "What is this?" she asked, quirking an eyebrow. Troy just kept staring at the cigarette box, his face becoming unreadable and puzzled. "This brand, it ain't common to see around these parts. It's possible it ain't been sold here, and someone could have brought it with them from another state." "Really?" Clementine raised an eyebrow in surprise. "But you have seen people use this kind before." Troy nodded with a muttered, "Yeah, but only in places I've seen I was at." A loud static then came from Clementine's pocket, and it cut them off. She jammed her thumb into the button and walkie-talkie hissed to it. "Hey Sarah, is everything okay?" There was no intelligible response, only more crackling, her pulse quickening. Clementine tried again, calling Sarah's name to try and hide her worry. The radio went silent for a few long, heavy moments before a hushed voice went on the other end. Clem, please. They've got the others. Please help us." Clementine's heart felt like it was pummeled into her stomach. "Mick, what's wrong? Who's there?" She exchanged a fearful look with Troy, who was even a little bit more startled. Sarah's words had broken up by sec. "Please, they've Mike to us. Vo, hurry. We don't want to die." All noise was cut off again. Clementine waited for a few more seconds, shaking as the device could get a response of any kind. "Hello? Sarah?" She attempted one last time to get in contact, to be continued to be silent. Her heart lurched as she realized the danger of her friends must be in. "Something's happening," she heard herself say. If it wasn't obvious, she glanced up at her companion, noting a serious expression on his face. Anxiety chewed away at her insides as she pictured all of her friends ending up like Krista. It was pathetic of her to say, but she couldn't help but whisper, "I don't want to lose everyone again." She wasn't ready to accept being alone again. "Then don't waste any more time," Troy growled, in all his hostility of what's somewhat refreshing. "Don't bitch and moan. Let's go back to them." She didn't need to be told twice. Without saying another word further, Clementine spun around and decided to take her chances on the road. She could only hope that it would lead to where they'd go. She took off into the forest, the sound of Troy's steps following behind her sounding more comforting than she would have admitted.